Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Trumas Perek Yud Aleph, Halacha Gimel, and Halacha Dalid. We're learning today Daf Kuf Beis. We left off Mamish on top of the Amid, but we're going to go back and quickly review the Braisa. Now, the Braisa began with Rab Meir. Interestingly, what we're going to continue to learn in the Braisa are other Tanoim that had a different version what Rabbi Meir said. This is all based on that which we learned in the Mishnah, that one is allowed to convert grapes and or olives that are truma grapes, truma olives, into wine and or oil. One is allowed to do so. What we see in the Braisa is that that is accurate midoraisa, meaning the bigger picture of we're not allowed to destroy products of truma. And turning all other fruits into juice is considered an act of destruction, or you are going against the positive mitzvah of safeguarding the truma, even though you want the juice. You want the juice, but the fruit gets destroyed. Certainly it gets downgraded. And that Yesoid stands that olives and grapes are not viewed the same way mida oiraisa. Nevertheless, midrabanan, at times, there are certain restrictions. Now, we're going to have different versions as to what Rabbi Meir said, and some very interesting ideas will come out from this Braisa. I'm just going to share them. First of all, even though we view grapes being created by God Almighty primarily for its wine, nevertheless, there's a certain type of desire that people have for grapes that they don't have for wine. It's more desirable. Just let's hold these words. And therefore, when you turn grapes into wine, even though you are finalizing its purpose, but you are destroying that type of desirability. Another concept that we're going to learn from this Braisa, that when you have tamei fruit, tamei truma b'chlal, we keep on repeating, one is allowed to use it as fuel. There is a difference between grapes and olives. Olives, the way they are as olives, are perfectly fit to be used as fuel. Even though I would think face oil is better, you can put oil in a cup. I'm just thinking what we're going to learn in the Braisa. Grapes, they become better for fuel, dafka when you squeeze them, not to use the wine, but when you squeeze the wine out, so then the grape, then the klipa and the seed and the shmarim, the sediment, that becomes much better fuel, dafka because it was pressed. So you're using it for its purpose, which is for fuel, by grapes when you pressed it, and by olive when you leave it the way it is. You're not benefiting anything. And every time you do an act of pressing it, you're somehow downgrading the original fruit. All of these svaras will be little svaras, not little, God forbid, think of it. It will be certain logics, which will be the yisoid of the understanding of various tanoim that we will learn. This will more or less be the whole daf Kuf Beis up until Halacha Dalid. In Halacha Dalid, we're going to continue to learn about various parts of the fruit that are subject to truma restrictions. And I forgot who mentioned the seeds. That will be in the Mishnah. It had to be a Mishnah. So we're going to speak about seeds. And actually, it's not so pashut. Let's see how far we get into the Gemara. But there is a big difference between seeds that are completely not edible versus seeds that are somewhat edible. Let's keep those words. Even when it comes to seeds that are somewhat edible, not so pashut that it's truma. We're not going to say that, but it could be that sometimes, depending on your kavana, it will be subject midrabanan to the restrictions of truma. And the same similar discussion we'll have in the Mishnah regarding bones of kachim. There again, there are bones that are b'chal not edible. You have bones that are somewhat edible. We know that. Bones that have marech inside, that have marrow inside. Are they imbued with kedushas kachim or not? Similar to the question of seeds of truma products. Now, we're going to learn also very interesting things in the Mishnah. When we remove the klipa from grain, I know in English there's a word called hull. In the Mishnah, it's called mursan. And then there's something called bran, subin. I'll explain in the Mishnah what they refer to. And the question will be whether the mursan has kedushas truma, whether the subin has kedushas truma. The Mishnah will discuss whether a kohen is allowed to sift the flour even after they got rid of the bran, it was common that people wanted to have very fine flour. We know this from the Nachas, and whoever's learning Kachim and Babli, it's higher grade flour when you sift it by using smaller holes. You're not removing psoilus, you're removing flour that's not as thin. Is a kohen b'chal allowed to do that? In other words, don't forget, we're not allowed to ruin truma. When you sift flour, you can start out with a large amount, and in the pursuit of getting very, very refined flour, you're going to lose a lot of it. What is that? Just because you don't want to have it, does it lose its kedushas truma? This will be a lot. And the final bigger topic that will have many variations in the Mishnah, is there any time where, since the quantity of truma is so little, then we don't have to be concerned of being mevatalit, and there is such a concept. When a kohen is drinking wine, what do you think? When he finishes the cup of wine, normally, the way we drink, there is a little bit of wine in the bottom of the cup. We just throw it out. We rinse it out. Is there a problem by truma? Do we have to go beyond the norm? And the Mishnah will say, no, you don't. It doesn't mean that wine is not truma. It is truma. But the kohen is allowed to behave with his truma the way he behaves with chul and food. This will be a gavaldik way of framing many different details that we'll have in the Mishnah and much more. We'll leave it at that, and let's dive inside. And the Gabbai is not here. He would make a comment, but I'm going to go back to Kuf Aleph Amid Beis. Just I have to be nice to the Gabbai, because the Shabbos, he takes Nekama by me when he makes the Mishaberachs. That's what he does. That's what I do. I go over a minute, and he goes with the Mishaberachs, L'chaim, with no end. The Mishaberach for the Baba, for the Zayda, for the niece, for the nephew. Okay, so guys, Daf Kuf Aleph Amid Beis. The Mishnah, what the Mishnah said, the standing Midai Raisa, like we mentioned, you are allowed to transform or convert, whatever the word is, olives into oil, truma, grape truma into wine, but midrabanan and not so pashit. So let's go. So like this, guys, if we were to have a chart, it would be very easy what we're learning. Certain people's minds make charts, and don't be concerned if you don't get the chart, but there's going to be a lot of, the Shem Rechinam, Shem Yosachar, Pshia, Oynes, all these charts that we had in Cheder. Such a chart will help many types of people. But we're going to learn many nuances, many versions of Rav Meir. Version number one is the first opinion, which is just directly Divrei Rav Meir, that when you have Zaysim of Truma, if they are Tohoirim, like we learned in the Mishnah, you can turn them into oil, even Midrabanan. You're not downgrading the olives. The olives were made for oil. But Tameim, if the olives, guys, remember, olives are Tamei Loy Yeyasu. And why is that? We said yesterday, because when you're going to be making the olives into oil, when you're pressing it, accidentally you might eat it. It's a simple, typical rabbinic fear, like a gedder that they made is, no, olives are edible. When people, at the stage, this must be, in other words, when people are producing oil and wine, it was common for the ones working to be toyim, to taste toyim chaim zachu. That's the way it worked. So if it's tamei, now if it's tahar, no big deal. We're speaking about kohanim doing it. Let the kohen eat it. And we're not worried that a Yisrael will eat it. Yisraelim keep away from eating truma. But the kohen is normally munching on it. So if it's tamei, don't do it. Now this logic should be the same by olives and grapes. That will be the issue that the Gemara is going to have. But in this first opinion, we say this chashash is only by the olives. But by grapes, by anavim, this first version, bein temeis, bein tehoiris lo yasu. Midrabanan, no, it's not the way it says in the Mishnah. Midairaisa, you can make it. Midrabanan, if a kohen receives both grapes or grapes as truma, even if they're tahar, he's not allowed to make them into wine. Why? The Braisa doesn't say. Okay, and we'll leave that. We'll leave that for the. I mean, I already spoke out in the intro that you are diminishing the desirability of eating a fruit. Even though it was made for the wine, there's some sort of downgrade, and he doesn't want. Now, don't forget, you can eat the grapes. You can tell the kohen, you got a gift. Eat it the way you got it. But that's a rabbinic law. Why don't we say that by the olives? Evidently, there isn't such a desirability to eat the olives. All of that the Gemara will work out. Okay, that's number one. Daf Kuf. Now we're beginning with today's Daf Kuf base. Rabbi Yaakov is not arguing with Rav Meir. Rabbi Yaakov had another version of what Rabbi Meir said. Rabbi Yaakov oimer mishmoi. And even though in our Mishnah explicitly we did not mention Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, but remember when we learned the Mishnah yesterday, I kept on telling everyone, according to most of the Noise Kalim, that the Mishnah was only Lishitas Rabbi Yeshua. Almost all of the dinim were only Rabbi Yeshua. Where do we have Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua before? Whether someone did squeeze truma fruit into juice, whether the juices b'chlal have the status of truma. You shouldn't have done it, but someone did it. And the way we worded the machlokes was not Rab Noson's understanding in Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbeinu HaKadosh's understanding in Rabbi Eliezer, that Rabbi Eliezer holds that the same status of the fruit goes into the juice. They're the same. And Rabbi Yeshua holds they're not the same. This is very consequential. So now, Rabbi Yaakov says in the name of Rav Meir, Lo nechleku Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbi Yeshua, al zeisim tohorim sheyei asu. And you know what, you could have argued that maybe Rabbi Yeshua will hold. Rabbi Yeshua holds juices don't have the status of the fruit. They don't have the status, who says you can make it into juice? Because olives and grapes are different. That's what we said. There is a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh where the Torah says explicitly that you should give to the kohen yitzar and tirish. How can you give it? It doesn't grow oil, it grows olives. Okay? And it doesn't only mean that you first made it into oil and then you were mafresh truma. It can even mean, that's the word given, that even if you were mafresh the olives and the grapes as truma, you can turn them into, so you can do that. So everyone agrees that if they're tahar, by zeisim you could. Where does Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer argue? According to Rabbi Yaakov, according to Rav Meir, ala tameim. Tameim means, again, olives. If olives are tamei, that what? Should Rabbi Eliezer oimer lo yeyasu. This sounds like Rav Meir, but Rav Meir that we just learned on Amud Aleph again for the second time, just said lo yeyasu, because you might eat it. Rabbi Yaakov says that Rav Meir says that's really subject to a machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. And Rabbi Yeshua omer, yes, yeyasu. Okay. In other words, where does Rabbi Yaakov differ from the first version of Rav Meir is whether it's lekula alma, which is Rav Meir, kuf aleph amud beis. If it's olives are tamei midrabanan, you can't make them into oil. And Rabbi Yaakov holds that Rav Meir says that's subject to a machlokes tanoi. Okay, weiter. Now, what about Anavim? This is all weiter Rabbi Yaakov, Mishmoi of Rabbi Meir. If they are Tohoiros, then you could make them. By the way, this is already completely different, right? We just said that Rav Meir says, on Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, that by Anavim, Bein Tohoiros, Bein Tameim, Midrabanan, don't make them. Rabbi Yaakov says, no. If they are Tohoiros, everyone agrees you could do it. If they are Tameyos, everyone agrees that you're not allowed to do it. Now, that also has to be understood. In other words, according to Rabbi Yaakov, there is an afkamina between olives that are tamei. Olives that are tamei is subject to a machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. According to Rabbi Yeshua, even though they're tamei, you can still make them. But even Rabbi Yeshua will be moide that grapes, if are tamei, you're not allowed to eat. And this is what Yakir said before. Why? Because when you're making olives into oil, according to Rabbi Yaakov, according to Rabbi Yeshua, it's easier to eat the grapes, harder to eat the olives. The whole thing is maybe by accidental munch on it. And it's going to be amazing that this statement will be subject to a machlokes tanoi. What is easier to eat? Something that's more readily available or more tasty or more norm is where there's a fear that the person will forget that it's tummy. In other words, according to Rabbi Yeshua, grapes are more readily edible more than olives. So that's why by olives, Rabbi Yeshua says, make them into oil. What are you worried about? He's going to eat it. It's not, like that's what you said before. How can you eat? You're not going to eat the olives. You're making them into oil. You're not going to eat on it. Grapes, people, it's more readily edible. And therefore, even Rabbi Yeshua will say, lo yos. Next, Amar Rabbi Yudan. Now we have another Tana. This is not Rabbi Meir, not Mishmoi Shel Rabbi. What does Rabbi Yudan say? Excuse me. Moidem Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yeshua b'zeisim tohoirin. If the zeisim are tohar, you can make them into oil. So far, like Rav Meir. Okay? So far, like Rabbi Yaakov Mishmoi. So far, it's at least that if the zeisim are tohar, even midrabanan, no problem. That what? That Rabbi Eliezer says lo yeyasu, Rabbi Yeshua omer yes yeyasu. So far, Rabbi Yudan is saying exactly what Rabbi Yaakov said, Mishmoi Shel Rav Meir. So far. Where do they differ? It's not just another repeating the same thing. Now, But va'anovim, now comes a new thing. Being tohoros, being temeos, yeyasu, yeyasu. Now, how can he say that? I'm going to say the words. That means, according to Rabbi Yudan, there is actually a greater chance that someone is going to eat olives more than grapes. How can there be such a machlokes? I don't know. To me, it's mamish sounds like a machlokes in Mitzias. Or it almost sounds like what are you looking for when you're eating something? Whatever it is that you're looking for, some people look for olive, some people look for base. If the way of eating is for one idea, one purpose, then there's a greater chance you're going to eat the olives. People are looking for the taste? People are looking for the texture? People that are just looking to calm their nerves, it's all the same. They eat everything. But people that are looking for something, it's mamash, it's a machlokes that according to Rabbi Yudan, there's a greater chance you're going to eat the olives. And therefore, you can't do it if it's tummy. But by anovim, no one is going to eat the anovim. So therefore, not only tohoros, why not eat the tohoros? What and make it into? You can make it into wine, even tomatoes you can make it. Now we have the fourth opinion. Amar Rabbi, see, some people had the version that Rabbi Yochanan, and I just want to say that according to that version, what I find beautiful is that in the Yerushalmi, I think what I'm saying is correct. The barrier between Tanoim and Amoraim wasn't so strong. Like in the Bavli, we have to say, Rav Tanu Palik. And if he wouldn't consider him a Tana, he cannot argue. I don't think in the Yerushalmi it was so strong. It was the earlier generation of the Amoraim, which, by the way, when we say Rav Tanu Palik, we already learned that can go to Rav, that can go to Ilfa, that can go to Rabbi Yochanan, the earlier. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan would be that Rabbi Yochanan has a fourth opinion. Anyways, but that's not our version. Our version is that the final opinion in the Brais, it's all from Tanoim, it's from Rabbeinu, Rabbi himself. That Amar Rabbi, Moidim Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yeshua Bezeisim Tohoirin Sheyeyasu. So far, so good. Va'anovim Temeyois. Listen to this, guys. Vezeisim Temeyim, finally, Lo Yeyasu. Gavaldik. Va'anovim Temeyois. Vezeisim Temeim Lo Yeyasu. By the way, this is like Rav Meir on Kuf Aleph Amid Beis. But where do they argue? Where does Rebbe argue with Rav Meir? They argue, he says, Valmen Echleku. Nechleku means, where does Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua argue? Only, guys, on Anovim Tohoiros. That what? That Rabbi Eliezer says, even Anovim Tohoiros don't make. The question will be, why? What's the downside? What are you losing? It's Tohoiros. The Rabbi Yeshua says, yeah, you can make it. So again, we'll need to explain why would there be an issue with Tohoros. The same question we had before on Divrei Rav Meir. Same question. Why? In other words, we're finding throughout some who opine that even if the product is starred, you can't make it. That will have to be explained. Okay. And now the Gemara explains. Listen to these words. Kol Amoravyon al de Rabbi Meir. All of the opinions, we had 4 opinions. Even though Rabbi Yaakov, Kuf Beis on top, is Mishmoi, but just for the sake of clarity, we're going to call it Rabbi Yaakov. So all of the opinions that argue with Rabbi Meir, which means Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Yudan, and Rebbe, all of them hold that Ba'anovim Tohoiros Sheyeyasu. And that makes sense. Midoi Raisa, olives and grapes are created for their juice, so you can make it. So v'lama amar lo yeyasu. Why does Rabbi Meir say Kuf Aleph Amid Beis? Why would he say that you can't do it? What would be the right? It's Tohoros. So explains the Gemara. These are the words that we said. Chashuvois hein lo oichel yoser min hamashka. They are a more preferred food. In other words, there's a certain desirability. If a person were to be asked, do you want to eat the grapes or should we turn it into wine? I'm not asking the people in this room. I already know what they would say. What Rabbi Meir is saying is that even though God created them for their wine, but there's a certain desirability that people have for the grape, which you lose when it's no longer oichel. You went from oichel into mashke. Do you want the mashke or do you want the farbaisen? Problem is, it's either or, because either this is the farbaisen or this is the mashke. So when you turn it into wine, you removed that part that was more desirable. That goes against midrabanan, the mishmeres terumaisa. You have to safeguard. You're not safeguarding its desirability. Okay, that's one opinion. That's Rav Meir. Next, Kol Amor Ravyan al de Rab Yudan. All of the other Tanoim that argue against Rab Yudan, Rab Meir, Rab Yaakov, and Rabbi, all of them hold that when the Anavim are Temeyois, Shelo Yeyasu, which makes sense. Why? That's what we're saying, that Midrabanan, they are afraid that if you're turning it into juice, in the case of Anavim, into wine, Bishoigeg, while you're working it into wine, you might munch on it. That makes sense. But Velama Amar Sheyeyasu, so what would be Rabbi Yudan? He stands alone and he says that you are allowed to make grapes into wine. They are tamei. Don't forget, even Rabbi Yudan is moida that olives that are tamei, Rabbi Eliezer at least, may not be made into oil. Why would even Rabbi Eliezer say, like, what will be the difference? Answers the Gemara, the logic here will be, b'shvil leihonois min archatzanim min hazogim. When the olive and when the grape is tamei, it's not tamei asur bahana, like truma tameya is muter bahana. What people will use it for is for fuel. So when it comes, this is a mitzias thing. Olives themselves are equally just as fit for fuel as oil. Maybe not in a cup, but if you want to throw it into a fireplace. Grapes, if you don't squeeze out their juices, the grapes when they are still whole won't be as good as a fuel as when you first squeeze out the juices. Don't forget, you're not using the wine as fuel. You're using the sediment. You're using the chartzanim and the zogim. There's a machlekes b'chlal, which one is chartzanim, which one is zogim, right? We know this from Parshas Nazir. We're going to go that chartzanim are the seeds and the zogim is the skins. Whichever one. Some people say it's the opposite. That is greater fuel. So that would be a logic why Rabbi Yudin will say that even Rabbi Eliezer, you are allowed to press them. On one hand, you have a chashash, you might eat it. It's a very small percent. Who's going to eat? People know it's tummy. But there's an upside. What's the upside? The kohen gets to use it. By not allowing him to press it, you're not even allowing him to fully use it as fuel. That's the logic. Now, let's go weiter. Zeisim that are tameim. What? It comes out when you put together the chart of the Braisa. Rebbe and Rav Meir, they stand together by holding that Zeisim Tameim are not allowed to be made into oil. Rabbi Yaakov, in the name of Rav Meir, and Rabbi Yudah or Rabbi Yudan, they are of opinion that olives are allowed to be made into oil. We already explained, because they hold that olives are less edible. When you're making them into oil, it's not even that edible. In other words, it's 2 against 2. So the Gemara says, Heich of the Nuvda. So how should we paskin? The Gemara doesn't mean to ask a question that's terrible. Whenever you learn a Braisa, he's teaching you how to paskin from learning Mishnah Gemara, which is something that we lost how to do, because everyone made it easy for us. When you learn all of these opinions and you have 2 against 2, you cannot paskin from what we learned. If there would be 3 against 1, then you would go according to the Roiv. And again, we know from Chulin. Right? Where did we have from Yevamis? That was my mistake. Yevamis, which daf? I forgot. Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis. No, daf Yud Gimel Yevamis is about the Elul. That was something else. We have the klolim that 2 tanoim. Who do we paskin like? Huh? No, but there's a whole Amud on Amud Beis where we have all of these. The hierarchy of who do we paskin like? Okay, let's go right. Says the Gemara, in other words, and I want to add something else. Since the Gemara says we don't know how to paskin, l'chu'ura, since Safik the Rabbanan l'kula, that's another bigger rule. If it's us, it's only the Rabbanan. Our Mishnah is not being argued with. Our Mishnah is only speaking midoraisa, so Safik the Rabbanan l'kula, l'chu'ura. Okay. Now, the Mishnah, and this is going to already lead us into the new Mishnah, spoke about stems. And the Mishnah enumerated certain fruits, which there we say that their stems, which are partially edible, are considered food or fruit. And when that fruit was designated as truma, the stem itself may not be eaten by non-kohanim. The Gemara is going to qualify that. Says the Gemara, Rab Ze'era says in the name of Rabbi Lazar that our Mishnah is only b'muvloyis ba'oichel. It's only speaking about the part of the stem that is swallowed in the fruit, because in the stem, there's the stem that goes inside the fruit, and then there's the stem that protrudes from the fruit. Even the fruits, right, the figs that the Mishnah enumerates, the part of the stem that's not muvla is considered eitz ba'alma, and a non-kohen is allowed to eat it. Gavaldik. Now the Gemara gives you a big statement that I want you to know, that Rab Ze'era, right, Rab Ze'era or Rab Ze'ira, called the Trumais or the Taharais, all of the statements that we have in his name, that he said, either in Masechtas Trumais and in the Seder of Taharais, not Zeroim Taharais, Trumais and Taharais, Shmua b'shem Rabbi Lazar. He's saying it in the name of Rabbi Lazar. And that's a big compliment. Look inside the Marafulda, the first one under the Gemara. Call the Trumas v'hataharis. Call halacha shel Trumas v'shel taharis. Lamad Rab Ze'era me Rab Lazar. Upirisham b'shem shemaitza the Rab Lazar. In other words, even if we don't have a befedish Rab Ze'era b'shem Rab Lazar, stam Rab Ze'era, it's always b'shem Rab Lazar. Now, why do we need to know that? Because lefi shehoy Rab Lazar baki bahen ma'oid lafarsham kedinam. In other words, the Yerushalmi is giving you a klal when Rabbi Lazar, the Amoida, the contemporary of Rabbi Yechanan, when he made a statement, Trumais and Tarais, he's the Gavaldik. He gets it right, he's saying the halacha, and that same goes to Rab Ze'era, because everything Rab Ze'era said was in his name. So, for example, this Chiddush, the Mishnah says stems of figs are Truma. Not so simple, only the one that's Muvla. That's the halacha. Now that we went off stems, now we're going to go to seeds. Now will be a hemshech. Says the Holy Mishnah. Gar'inei truma, seeds of truma. Right, that's what Rab Shlomo asked yesterday. Are they truma? Are they not truma? Depends. Now, let me say these words. Sometimes in halacha, intent is enough. Some areas in halacha, your intent only carries weight if the intent is expressed through behavior. Like by your wife, your intent won't help you. If it's expressed in behavior, then it's a good thing. If it's a good thing, I'm talking about a good intent. If it's a bad intent, even without behavior, you're going to get into trouble. And you'll know it not from me, you'll know it from you. Okay, so garine truma, seeds of truma. Bisman shuhu mechansan, you have seeds. Some seeds, if the kohen gathers them to eat. So he's doing something which is expressing that he wants them. The Gemara will make it clear, we're not talking about seeds that are b'chlal not edible. They are never truma, not only not midoraisa, not even midrabanan. Okay, and I want you to know that it will become clear next year that even the seeds that this kohen is gathering to eat, it's only Truma midrabanan. Never midoiraisa. Seeds are not midoiraisa imbued with the kedusha of truma, but midrabanan, if you will eat them. How do I know? You're doing a maisa, you're gathering them, showing that you intend to eat them, then it becomes midrabanan like truma, and the Gemara will discuss the degree of edibility that's needed. Because there are times that we say that batla daita, just because this kohen is planning to eat something that's generally not edible, we don't say it's always going to be truma midrabanan. So we're speaking about certain types of seeds. So if he gathers them, heina surais, midrabanan, surais means that they are usher to be eaten by non-kohanim, and I'll tell you more, they are not allowed to be discarded. But once they are considered as truma, then even the kohen is obligated to safeguard it. But if you're eating a fruit and those seeds are somewhat edible, but when the kohen is eating it, he right away threw it away. he's demonstrating through his behavior that he doesn't plan to eat it. Then they remain mutter. And the question that we would have in the Babli is, that's a contradiction. In other words, if you have to show intent through behavior to make it truma midrabanan, then if you don't do nishtaher nishtahin, then it should be not truma. If it's about you throwing it away, that is what shows that you don't want to eat it, then it's mutter, then stam, even if you're not mechanson, it should be, you understand, it sounds like from the Mishnah, you have to both show through your behavior the intention to gather it, to eat it, that makes it truma. And if you show that you plan to discard it, then it's not truma. And if you show nothing, it's not clear. But anyways, let's see. So that's not, now, daf kuf beis amid beis. The same rule applies to bones of kachim. And we're speaking, dafke chevra, about bones that are partially edibles, whatever that means. Bones that are b'chlal not edible, not even midrabanan, have kedushas, kachim. But if they are partially edible, even though mido'eraisa, they don't have the sanctity of sacrificial meat, but midrabanan, bisman shehu mechanson, when the kohen who has the kachim, and by the way, it can even go to a Yisrael, by shlamim, by kachei kalam, that you can eat in Yerushalmi. If he's doing something that's showing that he intends to make use of the bones through eating, put them in a soup, then they are asurim. But the imish licham, then they are mutarim. All of this is midrabanan. All of this is predicated that both the seeds and the bones, even if they are partially edible, midorais are not considered food. Okay. Now, when you have grains, there are two times that you're going to remove the shell. One is prior to milling it. All of what it's removed, when you thresh it and then you winnow it, all of what flies away is called mursan. I don't know in the modern Hebrew, but I know these words are probably used. You have mursan, you have subin. Are these words used today? Okay. I'm with you. Okay. So hamursan, so when it comes to mursan, this is a heavier klipa. This is what is being removed before the milling. The milling means the grinding the kernels into flour. All of what is removed, mutter. It's never going to have kedushas truma, not midaraisa, not midrabanan. Even though the person separated truma on the meruach, even if they still need to get rid of more of the mursan, just because you declared this 2% truma, whatever is being removed, the impurities, the husks, the shell, the klipa that's going to be removed prior to the milling, that never has kedushas truma, not even midrabanan. But subin is that after you milled it, there's still some impurities in the flour. And how do you get rid of the subin? You can't winnow it. You have to sift it. Now, when you sift flour, there are two purposes of sifting. One is to remove the subin. We're looking for modern Hebrew. And like we mentioned in the words of introduction, even after you get rid of the subin, other people would sift it again and again and again to get the finest type of flour. Then you're removing flour from flour. That's not subin. Subin is you needed to sift it, but the sifting it is to remove the subin from the flour. So subin, now again, subin is klipa. Why would it be imbued? Still, the Mishnah says that if the subin is coming from a fresher grain, chadoshis means a fresher grain, they will be asib. And let me tell you why. The subin in themselves never got kedushas truma, but fresher grain is more moist, and when you mill it, and it has that type of moisture, when you sift out the subin, some of the flour will stick to the subin. So it's not about the subin. It's about in the bran, there's a little bit of flour. Flour is truma. So a non-kohen is not allowed. He's not saying you're not allowed to sift it. He's saying that when you sifted it, since some of the flour might be stuck or will be stuck on some level to the bran, a non-kohen cannot eat it. But if the flour prior to sifting it was already considered older kernels, however that's defined, it doesn't have that level of moisture. When you sift the subin out of it, none of the flour will stick to the subin. the subin remains completely non-truma, not even midrabanan. Then mutarois. Now says the Mishnah.
That a non-kohen can have, meaning it's not considered food, but
it's not considered. There's no kedusha of truma. I know today people put bran into food because people have digestive issues, and when you eat bran, dafka because bran is not food, your body cannot absorb it, so the body gets rid of the bran. So it helps a person get rid of the other waste. No, it's people eat the bran for that purpose, but it's not considered food.
What about animals? That considered also?
Another example, you can give it to animals. Very good. No, it has no kedusha of truma, b'diyuk. But if the bran might have stuck to it some flour, then you can't. Exactly. Now, noyeg betruma, a kohen is allowed. No, you can think, how can a kohen ever sift the flour that came from kernels that are chadashos? How are you even allowed to do it? You're doing it, I get it, to get rid of the bran. But now that the Mishnah said that in the bran some flour will be there, we just said that you have to safeguard the truma. You can't destroy truma. So the Mishnah says safeguarding truma doesn't mean you have to behave with it unlike you would behave with chulin. Since the normal way is that after you have flour, you sift it, a kohen is allowed to sift it. Noyeg betruma kederach shu noyeg b'chayil. You are allowed to remove the waste. And other next step, which is not the same but the same, that hamesales kav oikabayim l'sa'ah. One saw, we just learned this is 6 kav. After you got rid of the subin, the big yichus in those days was to have fine flour, not bleached flour. Fine flour. Fine flour means that even if there's no subin, you still want to have a finer flour. How do you make it into a finer flour? By sifting it again. And by sifting it again, we learned this in Masechta Menachos. How many times did they sift it when it came to the Menachos? To have the highest quality, which means the most refined flour. The disadvantage of sifting it is that when you sift it, what happens? The finer flour goes to the bottom, goes under, goes for you, but what remains on top is not waste. What remains on top now will be bona fide truma. So here, mainly when it comes to removing the bran, the Mishnah says that a kohen is allowed to remove the bran. Even though some of the flour will get lost, he's not destroying it, he's just doing. But maybe you would think, but he's not allowed to sift it again and again. The Mishnah says that if he wants to sift it so fine that from one saw, from 6 kav, he's only going to remain with 1 or 2. Even if he wants to sift it on that level, he's allowed to do it. But that which he removed is mamish truma. That he cannot throw away. Lo ya'abed es hasha'ar. So what should he do with it? I don't know, sell it to another kohen. Not everyone wants to eat such fine flour. I'm sorry. Ela yinichena b'makom hamutzna. The same idea. No, what's unwanted for you, you have to make sure that people remember that it's truma. Gewaldig. And by the way, this has to be learned. This is learned. One of the psukim that God speaks to the Kohanim, probably in Parshas Koirach, Hashem says, Ki lachmoihu, that the grain of truma is his bread. And the Torah could have says, Ki lechemhu. Lachmai means that it's his, that the kohen gets to determine to eat it the way he wants to eat it. And if he's processing it in a way where a lot of it gets put aside, he's allowed to do it. Lechem apanim is not truma at all. Lechem apanim is bona fide kachim, but the same idea. All of the menachos that were made in the Beis Hamikdash were made out of flour that was already sifted all these times. See, in the Beis Hamikdash, they only consecrated it b'kedushas haguf. They put it in the clay sharis after they reached the level of purity. Here, by the truma, it was designated as truma still in the kernels. So that's the issue. Now, truma, all showing how, again, ein mevatlen isa lechatchila, but when you're doing your normal steps, when it comes to food preparation on any level, a kohen is allowed to be normal. So you have a storage room. Imagine, a kohen has in a storage room, he has a truma, and he uses it up. And now he wants to use that storage room for chulin kernels. One might have said, before putting chulin kernels, you have to make a bedikas chametz, which means you have to go in there with a magnifying glass and you have to look for every single kernel on the ground, because if there is even one kernel on the ground, that's truma. If you're going to pile it up with chulin grains. After you did that, it won't be dimua because it's going to be nullified way more than 101. You're going to be mavatal, but a mavatal is lechatchila. So maybe a kohen can't just switch using a room that was storing truma to storing chulin prior to you fully sweeping it out to get rid of every little vestige. Gabba is quiet. Oh, no. That once you cleaned it out, he says, you can use a broom. You don't have to manually get rid of every single kernel. Ella machabed, guys, machabed here means sweeping it. You're machabed at kedarkoi. And then v'noisen l'toicha chulin. It's not called you are mavatal isa lechatchila. Similarly, you have a barrel. The barrel has in it oil, truma oil. Let's say the kohen now is receiving chulin oil. The barrel is empty. But we all know when it comes to oil, even more than wine, oil is sticky. So you would think you have to go in there and scrape every drop of oil. You know, you don't. He says, "V'chein chaviyus shel shemen." Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped a step. Similar. You have a chaviyus of shemen, and it broke. So it's falling on the ground. So you're quickly saving it. That you have to do. How far do you have to do it? Do you have to pick off the ground every single last drop? Do you have to squeeze your hand on the ground to pick up? No, you do it the way you normally would do it. You don't have to wipe up every single drop off the ground. Now comes the case of pouring. If you are pouring, this is wine or oil from one container into the other. So when you pour something, we're going to halachically say that there are two steps that are happening. First, a stream. After there is much less left in the mashpia, obvious, it goes from a stream to dripping. Once it goes into the dripping phase, once 3 drops came out, if the kohen wants, he can say, I cleaned it out. And in Chiddush, you would think, no, leave it overturned, leave it turned overnight. I don't know, put a sponge in there. You don't have to do that. The nitev shalish tipin, once it reached the dripping phase, if only 3 drops already went out, or more, but you only need 3, then it's already considered cleaned out. And now, noisen l'toicha chulin, even though when you're going to be putting chulin in, you will be nullifying the small amount that's in there, doesn't matter. You don't need to completely dry it out. But what happens if you didn't fill it up with new chulin oil? 3 drops went out from the dripping phase, and now you just turned it upside down, hirkino, and you're leaving it empty. What's going to happen next morning? All of the oil that was on the walls of the barrel will go back down to the bottom. Now in the bottom, you're going to have a certain amount of oil. So I'm not allowed to say, if I'm a kohen, since I was allowed last night to put in chulin, which would have nullified it, so that which remains is not truma. I'm not allowed to say that. If I didn't put in chulin oil, and yes, hirkina, I inclined it, that means I put it back down so the oil gathered to the bottom of the barrel, umitzas, it collected. Sometimes mitzas means to suck out, but it means it collected harezu truma. In other words, we're not saying that you had a storage room and the kernel on the ground. We're not saying that since you were machabit kedarkoi, whatever remains somehow is no longer truma. What remains is truma. If you find a kernel, it's truma. The little bit that remains in the barrel is truma. If my barrel broke, and I have truma oil, and it fell on the ground, and I cleaned off the ground, but I left some drops, as the Mishnah allowed me, it doesn't mean that a Yisrael can go and eat that. That you can't do. It retains the status of truma. Elama, you're not chayiv to go at kedei kach, and you can be mevatel it. And now that we spoke about how small quantities of truma are not under the duty of the kohen safeguarding it, similar, we're going to speak now about trumas meiser of the mai. So we learned Masechtas the mai, and what did we learn in Masechtas the mai? That midrabanan, the produce of an amoritz, is treated somewhat like untithed, only for not for truma gedola. not for Truma Gedoyla. But what must the person, the Chaver, remove Trumas Meiser, which is already 1%, a very small amount, even though really he removes Meiser Ishin, then he removes Meiser Men HaMeiser, but the Meiser Ishin itself he doesn't have to give to a Levi because of HaMoitzim Chaveda all of Araya. It's only a din Imaminis, and Trumas Meiser is a din of Isser Veheter. And so in other words, it's possible that when it comes only to Trumas Meiser, it's 1%, it's a very small amount. And the Mishnah is telling you that if to begin with you only have a very, very small amount of Trumas Meiser, you b'chlal don't have to give it to a kohen. V'kama tehebe Trumas Meiser shel demai, for you to be chayiv v'yoylicheno lekohen, just for the record, you never have to actually give it to the kohen. Okay, Ido, I'm sorry. I have to notify the kohen that I have truma in my storage room. But that's the meaning. So, in other words, the Mishnah is telling you now that we saw that if it's a very small amount, you can be mevatel it. If it's a very small amount, I don't even have to notify the kohen. What's that small amount? Echad mishmoina lishminis. 1/8 of an eighth of a loig, which is 1/64 of a loig. If I have that amount, that's considered something. Okay, a loig is the liquid measure of the volume of 6 eggs. 1/64 of that, just the lahoir that in Masechta Soita in the beginning, Daf Hey, right? We had that whole sugya of called Adam Sheyesh by Gasa Soruach, like many different statements. And all these very heavy statements about arrogance. And then, right, it was said in the name of Rav. Remember that Talmud Chacham Tzarech Sheyehei Boy Echad Mishmoina Lishminis. And Rashi in the Gemara says that Echad Mishmoina Lishminis was actually a measure. They had a small measure called an uchla, a mishkol cotton. That was the smallest measure utensil. So there, he has to have Echad Mishmoina Lishminis. It's something. To have some backbone, to have some whatever that means. Over here, it's the opposite. That if you have Echad Mishmoina Lishminis, then you already have to notify the kohen. If you have less than that, then you don't have to even notify the kohen. We're going to end over here. Again, the guy tomorrow, if I go the 2 lines, the Gabi will make me Shabbat tomorrow, Veli Soif, take his revenge. So we'll be Chavedim. I'm going to stop here. And next year we'll begin on the Kuf Beis.